What is going on, everyone? Happy Sunday. Welcome into GC Live Sunday Reset with your host, Jack Veltri. Now, when you're seeing this, this is going to be a recorded video as opposed to my normal live streams. I am currently, I'm recording this on Thursday morning, but at the time of when you see this, I will probably be on some sort of ride at Epcot, Animal Kingdom, or Hollywood Studios, somewhere at Disney, because I'm going out of town this weekend with my girlfriend for her birthday. So we're going to Disney this weekend. And so we are going to be recording GC Live Sunday Reset in advance. Going to be having Kevin Miller on, my coworker, as a guest here shortly. But before we get started, I want to talk to you guys about our sponsor of the day, Prize Picks. So, Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports app in North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, and then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the number one daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty in the past for football, baseball, NBA just started. So there's a lot of good things going on. College football is going to be going on this weekend, the World Series. NHL just started too recently, so a lot to pick from. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to get involved in the game. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app and use the code on screen, GC, that stands for Gamecocks Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in laps. I want to thank PrizePicks for being a wonderful sponsor of our Gamecock Central live programs. And so we are going to be talking about not just football this week. So it's a bye week right now for South Carolina. The Gamecocks are off after beating Oklahoma 35-9 over the weekend. They'll be back in action next Saturday on November 2nd for a 5-game stretch, starting with the Texas A&M Aggies, who are playing LSU this weekend. And so we'll see what happens with that. But we're going to be talking some football, men's basketball, and of course, we'll be talking baseball. So we got a lot to break down. And to help me do so is an absolute guru when it comes to all these sports, just like myself, the man, Kevin Miller. Kevin, how we doing, boss?
Doing all right, man. I'm glad to be on with you today.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me, or having you on, actually, as a first time guest on this program. Appreciate it, man. So yeah, let's dive right into it. So South Carolina football, they are in a good spot right now, I would say. Wouldn't you think? They just beat Oklahoma pretty well. They're going into a bye week, and I know the bye week might be a little bit concerning considering the fact of look at what South Carolina did the last time coming out of the bye week when they lost to Ole Miss. So I'll ask you the question right away. Where do you feel like this team needs to improve coming out of the bye week next week?
Yeah, the word improve it's the operative word, right? You've got to figure out, if you're the South Carolina coaching staff, what takes you from we might can win a couple of games down the stretch to go with a what should be a pretty easy Wofford win, to what, maybe we can do something special and finish 8-4, 9-3. You got to figure out what takes you from that 5-6 win, minimum, to an 8 or 9 win season. I think it has to, based on what we've seen this year, I think it has to start with examining the offense. I know the offense has had some good moments. I know Lenore Sellers and the offense as a whole had their first clean game against Oklahoma without any turnovers, without putting the ball on the turf. But there still has to be improvements in terms of getting the ball in the end zone, moving the ball down the field, having sustained drives so that your defense, who's been playing lights out most of the year, doesn't have to go right back out on the field after just a 3 and out. You have to figure out what disconnect there is. And I think it starts with offensive line play. Not that those guys have been as bad as I think maybe the numbers might indicate. The tackles for loss numbers and sack numbers are among the worst in college football. I don't think that tells the full and accurate story, but that unit needs to be better if this offense is going to be better, and the offense has to be better if the wins and losses on the record are going to be better. And so whether that's figuring out ways to kind of hide some deficiencies potentially with quick hitting plays. We've seen South Carolina even have some luck with traps and pulling guards. I mean, our Torricelli Simpkins absolutely destroyed J.J. Weaver against Kentucky earlier in the year. So they've got the ability to move those guys around. So whatever it takes, South Carolina's offensive staff has to figure out a way to get their offensive line to hold up their end of the bargain so that the rest of the offense can make plays.
Is there one overarching issue you see with the offensive line in terms of why things are the way they are? I think obviously the issues are mostly in pass protection, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, run blocking has been so this year. You need to create gaps for guys to run through. And at times they've been able to do that because South Carolina has a decently good running game. It's just been a little hit or miss lately. But with pass protection, it always seems like Sellers is under immense pressure in the backfield. And I think part of that is because you look at the tackle spot specifically with Case and Henry and Josiah Thompson. Not a knock on these guys, but let's be real. They've gotten beat off the ball a good bit of the time. And I think that's kind of what leads to these issues that they're having with pass pro. What are you seeing that kind of stares out as a glaring issue?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. The pass protection, especially on the edges, hasn't been good enough. I do think Josiah Thompson's been playing a little bit better of late overall. Inconsistency is still there. I mean, he's a true freshman, right?
Yeah.
Though he was a 5-star, that doesn't eliminate the fact that he's a true freshman. This is his first time playing college football. And Case and Henry, though a little bit older, he hasn't really played either. He got his first action last year and was hurt on the second drive and tried to come back a couple times, but never really got into it. So he's inexperienced too. So I think that's some of it. I do think, though, that there's been not to the point that we saw 2 years ago, especially, or the beginning of last season, but I do think there's been a lot of communication issues up front again. I don't know if it's a complicated or like an issue of having complicated play calls again. I don't think that's the case. From what we've been told, they do seem to have tried to simplify things.
Yeah.
But there have been times where I've seen a South Carolina offensive lineman see a rusher coming and not move toward them. And there's only one reason why an offensive lineman would not try to make a block. It's because he doesn't think he's supposed to, or he thinks somebody else has that responsibility. And Shane Beamer has pointed out there have been times where it's not an offensive line that has given up the sack. It's been maybe a running back didn't pick up a blitzer or an edge player that they were supposed to chip, or maybe a tight end didn't do their job. So it's not all on the offensive line. However, the blocking unit as a whole has struggled in pass protection. And honestly, the sack numbers would be higher except for Lenore Sellers' ability to escape. And I know that he holds on to the ball a little bit too. As a redshirt freshman, he holds on to it. But he's escaped from some pressure too. So I think you're right when you mention pass protection being an issue. And I think a lot of that is communication or understanding of who we're supposed to get at what time. Because there have been way too many times where you've seen a Gamecock offensive lineman turn his head to watch a pass rusher come by without making any contact. That's happened far too often.
No, totally. I absolutely agree with you. I'm glad you brought up the point that it's not all on the offensive line. Again, not all sacks and TFLs are going to be made equal, right? There have been times where we've seen on the tape the tight ends have missed blocks. Like the tight end blocking has not really been superb at all this year. And you can also argue it's the same deal with the running backs. There have been times, I go back to the LSU game specifically, where there were a bunch of times where LSU would bring a heavy blitz, like 7, 8 rushers, and the running backs, Rocket, Attaway, whoever's back there, wouldn't pick it up. Like they tried, but they whiffed on it. And I think that's the issue, where it's not just on all the offensive line. Now on the flip side, the defense, they've been doing a heck of a job getting to the pass rushing, or rushing the passer and getting in the backfield, making plays, having all these TFLs and the 9 sacks, the 13 TFLs, the 6 forced fumbles. I mean, you can go on and on with all the great stats this team accumulated in that Oklahoma game. I mean, is there anywhere else you see this defense in general needing to take another step forward? I mean, is it just the simple fact of limiting the explosive plays. Because, I mean, obviously that's been a little bit of an issue here and there where South Carolina in the secondary or just in general will get beat in coverage and they'll give up a big play. But it really hasn't haunted them too bad, even though it's happened a few times this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think big plays, I think that's definitely a factor, but I think a lot of that has to do with play calls, coming in with the type of pressure that South Carolina likes to bring. You're going to expose yourself on the back end a little bit. So if a quarterback makes a good read and makes it quickly, big plays can happen. We've seen that for sure. But I think that's kind of the price you pay for the added pressure that South Carolina's been able to bring from the linebacker spots and even sometimes from secondary players. I mean, earlier in the year, we saw both O'Donnell Fortune and Vakari Swain have success as a blitzer. That type of stuff does open up potential big plays in the passing game. So I think that's more of a natural consequence of the defensive system. But if I had to pick one area where improvement is fair to say that it's needed, it would be when opposing offenses decide to run right at South Carolina, especially on like outside zone type plays, or even stretch plays where they go right at those pass rushers. Because Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard have been freaks this year, and in the passing game, that results in sacks and pressures and forcing interceptions. But if they get into pass rush mode too quickly, sometimes it results in them getting upfield, and they'll run right past a run play. And against LSU, it wasn't the starting edges that struggled with that. But against LSU, we saw some of the reserve defensive ends come in and just fly up the field. And the freshman Caden Durham just kind of just ran right inside them and gashed them for chunk plays. And that's how LSU was able to, score better than any other team has against South Carolina this year, is because they're able to establish the run in that way. So I think if you had to pick one, it would be figuring out how to limit these runs where an opposing team just knows, okay, we're not going to pass the ball on this play. We're going to run it. We're going to run it off tackle. We're going to run it just inside where this edge rusher is going to get upfield. So figuring out how to tighten that up a little bit, because I think the defensive tackles have done a great job inside there, whether you're talking about Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders, Boogie Huntley, DeAndre Jules, even Nick Barrett in the past couple of weeks has gotten in there. I think those guys have done a really good job. So I think just tightening up that edge defensive end spot against the run, and not that they're getting beat on the outside, like they're not setting the edge. It's more of they're letting rushers get inside of them, if that makes sense. So I think tightening that up will help.
No, for sure. And you're definitely right about LSU, because I feel like that's probably the one game where, yeah, it was a tight game and South Carolina's defense still gave you a chance. But at the end of the day, 39 points are 39 points. And LSU, they hadn't had a run game at all through the first few weeks of the year. And then they just figured it out against South Carolina, and that opened up everything. So I feel like that's probably the one area where it's like they've been pretty good at stopping the run for the most part this year. But it's also like, hey, if a team is able to get it going through the run game, that just makes things a lot easier. And so they're going to have some tough challenges over these next few weeks. And we'll kind of transition into the rest of the schedule, right? And not to look too far ahead, but the rest of the schedule, you got 4 ranked teams right now, and that could change over the next few weeks here. But you get A&M at home under the lights. We'll see what time that game ultimately ends up being, and it'll be at Williams-Brice Stadium. Then you go to Vanderbilt for what's going to be, I would imagine, an afternoon game against the top 25 Commodores. I don't think we have been saying that at the beginning of the year. You get back home, play Missouri, who's number 21 in the country. I don't think Missouri's all that good. But then again, South Carolina, for whatever reason, just anytime they play Missouri, just hasn't been able to beat them. Then you get Wofford at home, and then you're at Clemson to end the year. And I think Clemson right now, until I see them, like if they go to Lane Stadium and they go to Pitt and they just demolish those teams, Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh respectively, then it's like, okay, that's probably your toughest competition outside of Georgia this year. I think you're feeling like, okay, Clemson's actually not like, I think they're a good team. It's just we haven't seen them go up against legitimate competition. You know what I mean? So how do you kind of see, if you had to take a wager or bet, a prediction right now, how would you see the rest of the season going for the Gamecocks?
Ooh, that's a question.
That is a question.
Yeah, I think you'll learn a lot about the Gamecocks' next opponent this weekend. You know, Texas A&M has a big game with LSU, a team that South Carolina's already played. And I know the transitive property doesn't work, really in sports, but seeing how teams play against common opponents, that's a real thing. You can't look at necessarily the stat book, you can't look at the scores necessarily, but you can check matchups. And so I think we'll learn a little bit more about Texas A&M. Are they the team that absolutely mollywopped Missouri, or are they the team that lost to Southern Cal, who has, I believe, a losing record right now? So, or excuse me, that was LSU that lost to Southern Cal.
Yeah, no, you're good.
You know what I mean? Are they the team? Are they the team that has had some struggles, or are they the team that looked like a playoff team against Missouri? And I think when push comes to shove, I think we'll see that that Texas A&M is going to be a tough matchup because they're gonna run the ball like we talked about. They're gonna challenge South Carolina on the edges. They're gonna move their big offensive linemen around. They're gonna pull them. They're gonna fold them around. They're gonna combo. They're gonna double team. They're gonna do a lot of things with their offensive line to get creative in the run game. We've seen that. Mike Elko's a good offensive mind as a coach, and I know he's not the only guy involved in the play calling duty over there. But I think we're going to see a tough matchup for South Carolina in that regard. However, South Carolina has a very good chance to win that game because even though we're talking about these ways the defense can get better, we're almost splitting hairs, Jack. South Carolina's defense has been really, really, really good. I mean, you can make the argument top 10 in the country overall this season on defense if you look at all the numbers. So if I had to pick that game, I think as things stand right now, I like South Carolina to win a relatively low-scoring game. And then you move into Vanderbilt, and I know they beat Alabama. I know they did. But South Carolina hasn't lost to Vanderbilt in – yeah, there you go, knocking on wood. Thanks, Jack. South Carolina hasn't lost to Vanderbilt in, 16, 17 years?
It's been, I think, 2008.
Yeah, they lost back-to-back in 07 and 08.
Yeah.
And South Carolina has the current longest winning streak against Vanderbilt of anybody. And until that changes, I'm just not going to pick the Commodores to beat South Carolina. I can't do it. South Carolina is a talented team with a really good defense. So it's not like we're talking about one of the struggling years and all of a sudden Vanderbilt's good, So I got to pick South Carolina to win that one. And if you win 3 in a row, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt, you could be talking about something special coming down the stretch. You mentioned Missouri. We don't really know what Missouri is. Some weeks Missouri looks good. Some weeks Missouri looks not so good. Luther Burden is a special talent, but they're struggling to get him the ball in space. Brady Cook and a couple other guys have been banged up. Cook was in the hospital during part of the game this past weekend. I don't see a reason why you should pick against the Gamecocks at home against Missouri as things stand right now. And so then Wofford is Wofford, and then that Clemson game on the road is the toughest test that remains, for sure. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to give Clemson any credit. I get it. They haven't played a tough schedule after they got smacked around by Georgia. But they're still a good team, and they have a lot of talent on that roster. And even though their depth isn't quite what it used to be, they're still a really good team. And I think we'll see a pretty hard-fought game that might look a lot like last year's South Carolina-Clemson game, if we're being honest. A defensive struggle. I think there's a little bit more firepower on the Clemson side of things this year than last year, if you really get down into it. But I think South Carolina should feel like they have a good chance to go 4-1 and have a shot at 5-0 down the stretch. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Hear me. I'm not predicting that. I think most realistically, you're looking at a 3-2 finish, but 4-1 is very attainable, and 5-1 is not out of the question.
No, and that'd be a great end to the year because, if you go 4-1, you're looking at finishing 8-4 on the year. You're probably getting into a pretty good bowl game. I'm not sure how the bowl game system will work, because obviously the playoff games are going to be the New Year's Six, and then how will it work? I mean, usually the Citrus Bowl is the highest ranked, the next best SEC team that didn't make the playoff. They get in there. And then you got some other bowl games in Florida and stuff, and the Vegas Bowl. So there's a lot of options for South Carolina. For me, I definitely I'm on the same wavelength as you, Kevin. I think they're probably they're going to beat Wofford. We know that. I think they're probably going to go 2-1 over these next 3 games. I just think there's another loss somewhere in there for South Carolina, and I don't think it could be against if they lose to Vanderbilt. That kind of changes a lot of things for me. I'm not knocking Vanderbilt. I think they're a good team, but I just think South Carolina's defense is. I mean, think about the Alabama game. Alabama's defense is not really that good. South Carolina is a lot better defensively, and if they start figuring it out offensively, it just makes things that much more doable for them, much more attainable. So I do think 2-1 over these next 3 are very possible, very likely. Worst case, you end up going 1-2. I can't see them losing to Vanderbilt. And I don't know about Missouri. I just don't know enough about them. We're going to learn a lot about them this weekend when they play Alabama, and they are a double-digit dog. And by the time this video is posted, the game will have already been over. But let's just assume Missouri's already, lost that game. They're 6-2 right now, and then they go to Columbia in a few weeks, South Carolina, that is. And I think that's going to be a tough game for Missouri, despite the fact that they have had South Carolina's number. Again, you brought up the injuries. Brady Cook's banged up. Their running back's banged up. That's going to impact this offense. I know they got Luther Burden. I know they're really hyped up. But man, don't you wish that the Tigers had a guy like Cody Schrader back this year, who was just unstoppable last year in the run game? That would make things a lot better for the Tigers right now. But there are just so many question marks where I don't know what team is going to show up. Whereas with South Carolina, you kind of know the defense is going to show up. It's more so like what kind of offense is going to show up. That really dictates what happens for South Carolina. You beat Wofford, and then Clemson at the end of the year. Look, because they haven't played a great schedule, it is hard to get a real like judge of how they are this year. They've beaten who they played. They've scored a lot of points. I think they are a pretty well-rounded team. They aren't as talented as they were during the other years where they were getting to the playoff and getting to all these great bowl games and stuff. It's not that type of team, but they're still a good team, and it's at Clemson. And if this game, there's no time yet for this game, but if it happens to be under the lights, I don't really like South Carolina's chances from that aspect, because it's hard to win in Death Valley at night. However, if this is a noon game like it was 2 years ago, I think you're kind of like, okay, you can catch Clemson kind of off guard, especially if Clemson has another loss or 2 on their schedule. I think they probably end up splitting Virginia Tech and Pitt. That's just a really kind of tough back-to-back stretch where, look, you go to Lane Stadium. If that's a night game, Clemson's won there before at night. But who knows? This is a different team, and we'll have to see what they're really made of. And then going to Pitt, Pitt's playing really good football this year. And that could be a game that kind of determines, like, who probably goes to the ACC championship maybe. I don't know. They probably will both end up being there if Miami somehow slumps a little bit. But I think overall, like Clemson, we'll get a real good idea of what they look like more so before this Carolina game in those 2 weeks leading up to it. And then they'll play Citadel, and then they get South Carolina at home. So right now, as it stands, look, I've said since the beginning of the year, I think South Carolina is going to go beat Clemson this year. I just think there's something about this defense that's really special, and they can go out there and compete toe-to-toe with anyone. So I think right now I'm feeling good about 4-1. At the beginning of the year, I did say 8-4 was my season predictions. I think that will probably stand to be the case, but I just don't see them going 6-6 or worse. I think 7-5 is probably a little bit more realistic, but 8-4 is definitely not off the table. And 9-3, I don't think they would get into the playoff at 9-3. I know with the ESPN FPI and stuff, there's a really minuscule chance that they can make the playoff and stuff, but I don't know, man. We'll have to see what happens. So 4-1's my bet. You're going 4-1 too?
I think I'm probably going 3-2, but I did want to say, by the way, the game I was getting tripped up on earlier, Texas A&M lost to Notre Dame.
That's right. Yeah,
I was getting that mixed up. But man, if South Carolina were to sweep through Texas A&M and Vanderbilt, and Missouri. If that were to happen, then obviously you're beating Wofford the next week. And if Clemson wins the rest of their games up to that point, you've got a matchup between South Carolina and Clemson in which a loss knocks Clemson out of the playoff picture, because a 2-loss ACC team is not getting in unless that's the conference champion.
Totally.
Which if they get if Pitt keeps winning, Clemson won't make it to the title game anyway, because of some of the tiebreakers. But a win for South Carolina, I know it's a small chance, but a win, I guess that would be 6 wins in a row to finish the year, put South Carolina in the conversation. There's never been more stakes for both teams as there would be in that situation. I know there have been top 10 matchups in the past where South Carolina and Clemson, both are ranked highly, but that was in the BCS era, not even the 14 playoff era. Neither of those teams had a realistic national title shot at that point in the year. But if Clemson enters that game at 10-1 and South Carolina enters that game at 8-3 with the schedule they've played, there's a chance that the winner gets in the playoff and the loser has to go home. And that's some stakes that haven't been seen around here before.
No, and you're definitely right about the early 2010s during the 5-game winning streak when these teams were top 15 in the country year in and year out. And you're right. Neither of them really had a chance to get into the playoff or even national championship during the BCS era at that point, because it was only 2 teams. But the stakes were high during those games. The stakes are going to be high if things kind of hold out the way we think they can, where South Carolina is maybe 8-3 and they have a chance to go 9-3. I don't know if Carolina would make the playoff. I feel I don't know. A 3-loss team.
I know.
They'd have some, I know, but they have some good wins on their schedule to where it's like, and here's the thing, man. Last point I'll make on this. The 4 ranked teams they're playing right now, if they end up still all being ranked by the end of the year, because that's always a big thing, is like, it's like if you beat some team at this point in the year, but then they're not ranked by the end of the year and they kind of fell off the face of the earth, it's like, oh, that win, it doesn't really mean as much, even though at the time you beat them when they were good. So, I mean, if those 4 teams, Missouri, A&M, Vanderbilt, Clemson, they all hold up and they're still top 25 teams by the end of the year, you got 4 huge wins over those types of teams inside the top 25. And that adds to your case of like, okay, you're probably the best 9-3 team out there. It's not impossible. And by that point, if South Carolina's 8-3, they're probably in the college football playoff rankings. I don't know where they would be. I would assume 3 losses, probably like
Still top 20.
Probably top 20. You're probably not top 12 yet, but you're on the outside looking in with a potential chance to really go out there and do some damage. And if you end up blowing out maybe 1-2 of these teams, like if you blow out A&M for whatever reason, or you just go into Death Valley at Clemson, and I mean, Clemson might be a top 10 team still by that point. You go out there and just beat them really good. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if it does, that makes your case that much more enticing, because we know how much a blowout win can kind of help their case. And speaking of cases and stuff, the NCAA tournament case for South Carolina men's basketball. I was talking about it on radio on Thursday morning with Tyler Head, and he was telling me that bracketology, the Gamecocks have not been picked by Joe Lunardi to go to the tournament this year. I think it's surprising. I think this team is arguably better than last year. I think they're more talented this year. I don't know. From a leadership standpoint, I think Nick Pringle is going to be a very bona fide leader for this team. Jacoby Wright's been here a long time and stuff. Right off the bat, does it surprise you that that people on the outside, national media, are kind of overlooking this team again?
No, just because, I mean, how long did it take last year before South Carolina cracked the top 25 ranking or cracked realistic bracketology projections? It took far too long. Everyone was just waiting, and seeming like they were just hoping that South Carolina would eventually lose. And I think we might have lost Jack there. But basically, the entire time that South Carolina was just running roughshod over their schedule, the polls were reluctant to put the Gamecocks in. And so I think when we look at South Carolina this year, there's probably going to be another wait and see type of situation. There's probably going to be a hesitancy among the national media to put the Gamecocks into that place again. I mean, Lenardi took a while last year to recognize that South Carolina belonged in the tournament. And then when they lost a couple of games, he had them on the bubble all of a sudden. Like they weren't firmly in until almost the very end, according to his projections. And the SEC media went ahead and predicted South Carolina to finish 11th in the conference. So I think there's a lot of wait and see with South Carolina from a national standpoint because, to be fair, South Carolina has not challenged for the NCAA tournament consistently. They haven't made it until last year since the Final Four run back in 2016, 2017. And there were only a couple of times they were even in the picture after that. So I get it. And I'm not surprised that there is that hesitancy.
Yeah. And I mean, they're not even like, you look at bracketology, they're not even a part of like the next four out, the first four out, last four in, last four buys. You would think this is a team coming off a year where they just weren't good. Like that's kind of what I feel like the perception is about South Carolina. Look, I understand from the standpoint of not a lot of people buy into the fact they're going to be able to do what they did last year again, but they don't even have to do what they did last year again. Winning 26 games, tying a program record, and setting the world on fire, being picked to finish last in the SEC last season, doing all these great things where everything just seemingly worked for you. You don't have to necessarily do that again. You got to win a lot of games to get to the tournament, but I don't think you need to win 26 and have this amazing year. You can be good and probably get in my opinion. So I think somewhere probably between that, I don't know if under 20 would get you in, but if you're around that, if you're 20 or over and you have some good wins on your schedule, because believe me, they're going to have opportunities to do so. SEC play, you're always going to be playing good teams. Like if you go to Rupp and you win, if you go play Alabama and Auburn, you beat those teams. Those are the top two teams in the SEC preseason media poll right now. You beat those teams. It's great. It's going to help your case. But you also have a pretty good non-conference schedule where you're playing Clemson at home. Clemson's going to be good this year because they finished, Elite Eight last year. And then you get on the road, Assembly Hall, Indiana. Indiana is not what they really used to be, obviously, but they're still ranked right now. Mike Woodson has done a good job there. They have some pieces that it's going to be tough for South Carolina to go in there and win a regular season game there. And then obviously you have the Fort Myers tip-off where you're playing Xavier, and we'll see who they play after that. So there are opportunities on the schedule to go ahead, and if you get off to a really good start like you did last year, it makes things a lot easier in terms of like not all the pressure's on you to win every SEC game, and you can go out here and lose a few and be all right. Because keep in mind, this team had some bad losses on their schedule last year. They lost a game at Clemson. They probably should have won, in my opinion. I thought South Carolina was just the better team in that game because they had, I think, a double-digit lead at one point. You got blown out by Alabama on the road. You got beat by 40 points at Auburn, and you had an ugly loss in the last second against LSU. So the point being, if you're still winning enough games, you can have a few of these bad losses and be okay. It's not like the college football playoff rankings where if you get beat by 40 points or whatever, you're probably done. And if you have two losses, you're out. You can lose a few games here and there and be okay and still make the tournament. I don't expect this team to be top 5 seed or anything in March Madness. I expect them to get in, though, and be somewhere between that 7 to 10 range, and we'll see what happens. And then from there, I think they can kind of run the table a little bit, and maybe I think they can get through day one or weekend one, I would say. Get through the first weekend, make it to the Sweet 16. I feel like that's a successful season, and it just shows they're going in the right direction. Whereas, obviously, in the past, like you said, Kevin, this program has not usually had consistent success. After the Final Four run, it took until last year to get back to the tournament, and you have a new coach now. The last time I think they made the tournament back-to-back years was in the mid-'90s. So it's been a while for this team. I think they have the pieces in place to do so, but we're going to have to see what happens. And we'll talk a little bit more of season previews and stuff next week when we kind of dive into everything with men's and women's basketball ahead of their seasons. But I will ask you, Kevin, we were both at Media Day on Monday at Colonial Life Arena. What were your general overall takeaways from the guys you got to talk to, and what kind of stood out from the overall message of what this team might look like this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I noticed was even before we got to speak to anybody when we got to see the end of practice, and there was a certain looseness, a comfortability that seemed like there weren't guys that looked like they were stressed out to even be on the floor. They looked comfortable. They looked like they were enjoying each other. When practice ended, nobody left the court. They kept getting up shots. They kept, trying to throw each other lobs at the basket, things like that. Things like that. It showed a cohesive unit. It showed a group that's comfortable and confident. And when we got to speak to the players afterwards, that just continued, right? I mean, I got the chance to talk to 7 or 8 guys, and so did you, and we all got to talk to guys who have no doubt in their mind that South Carolina basketball is good. And even amongst players, that has not always been the case with this program. The doubts that used to exist, even when you would talk to players and coaches around the team, that's not there anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that this team's going to go out and win 26 games again. That's not necessarily what that means. What it means is this team believes in itself, and the players we got to speak to echoed that. I mean, even a guy who redshirted last year, Arden Conyers, you speak to that dude, he is confident. He knows that he is capable of, from an athletic and skills standpoint, to be a factor on this team and help this team win. That's not normal, so to speak, for a program that hasn't seen prolonged success in basketball in a while. So that seems to be permeating the roster, this confidence. You talk to, or I got to talk to Jordan Butler, and he said at one point, it's like, me being a stretch big, I've got a unique skill set, which is one we got to see last year with BJ Mack a little bit. But the difference is Jordan Butler's 7 feet tall. And he said, if they don't close out to me, that's a mistake because I can shoot it. But if they do close out hard, it's a mistake because I can pass it over their heads. And the reality of this team is Lamont Paris has put them, from a roster standpoint, in a position to be as good or better than last year. And the media doesn't necessarily see it that way because they haven't seen it in action yet. You know how it is. You go from a program that's been losing. The first year, it's, well, we don't believe you can do it. And the second year is, well, we don't believe you can do it again. So that's what they're trying to buck right now. And I think they feel it. One of the conversations that one of our colleagues had with Miles Studi is like, I'm a little bit surprised they picked us as high as 11th. Coach Paris has gotten them to accept the fact that there are people out there that are going to disrespect them, and they feed off of it. They're confident.
And the thing I really like about this team, and you made all great points there, Kevin, the thing with this team is, and it sounds cliche, but man, does it work for them. They're very unselfish. And I think that is a real underrated characteristic trait to have as a basketball team and just a player in general. You look at this team, last year, there weren't any like ball hogs on the team. There wasn't any drama on the court like maybe in years past. But this team last year, they stuck together and made it work. And even during the hard times, you didn't see them crumble in the face of adversity and pressure. Like after that Auburn game, after the LSU game, that 2-game stretch could have been detrimental to your season, but you overcame it and you made it work the rest of the way. I feel the same vibes with this year's team. A lot of the key guys are back this year. Zach Davis had been telling me that they have the guys they want on this team. They feel the chemistry is just as good as last year, if not better. And I think we're going to see that this year. Now, are there going to be tough times throughout the season? Yes, it's how it's going to go in a very long few-month basketball season. You're going to go through some adversity. Maybe early in this year, if you lose to Indiana and then you go to Fort Myers and you don't play great, you're kind of looking at like, oh, man, is this team really just not that good this year? The fans are certainly going to think so. And the players, they got to have that belief that, hey, we're still a good basketball team. We can overcome anything. If they can overcome what they did last year with being picked to finish last and then they suffer all these tough losses, but they bounce back immediately, they'll be fine. So I do think this year's team is arguably better than last year. We'll have to see. If you had to kind of take a look at maybe who we don't talk about enough that might be like the most impactful guy on this team. I was going to ask you about the starting five and stuff and who you think would crack that, but we'll save that conversation for next week when we look at everything with this team. But if you had to pick someone that we don't talk about enough, we hear about Colin Murray-Boyles plenty. We hear about some of these impactful guys, but who do you feel like is the one guy that if South Carolina is going to have a good year, maybe off the bench, maybe, or just someone that we don't talk about enough? Who do you think is that guy for this team?
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a multifaceted answer here.
That's okay. I'm down with it.
Good. So I already mentioned Arden Conyers, and I don't necessarily think that he's going to be, like top 3 most impactful players on the team. But considering he redshirted last year, I think his impact might surprise some people. He's got a really high ceiling as a scorer and as an athlete. So I think he'll be a contributor that a lot of people aren't necessarily expecting. I think Nick Pringle, who, spoiler alert, pretty much everybody thinks he's starting at the 5 this year, right? I know we want to save the whole starting lineup conversation for later. But
we really know what it is. It's probably going to be – we'll just run through it real quick. Why not? It's probably going to be Pringle at the 5, CMB at the 4, some combination of either Zach Davis, who I think is probably going to start at the 3, or potentially Miles Stute. And then at the 2, probably Cam Scott, and at the 1, Jamari Thomas. Do you feel the same way?
I do. I think that's pretty much what it has to be right now. Obviously, like if you start off the year with Jacoby Wright starting at one of the guard spots, that's not like a death knell to the team or anything. He's a veteran player. Like he can do good things. We know that. But from what we can see, I think it's Thomas, Scott, Davis, Murray-Boyles, Pringle, with the caveat that potentially Miles Stute slides in instead of Davis. But I think you're right in that top 5. But Nick Pringle is going to be outrageously impactful for this team. Last year, there was one player on the team who could consistently guard all different types of bigs, and that was Colin Murray-Boyles. The problem is that Colin Murray-Boyles is about 6'7", which is huge still. Don't get me wrong. But compared to SEC bigs, he wasn't nearly as tall. So we saw a lot of the bigger, 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot type of guys have some success against South Carolina because BJ Mack, who was a good offensive player, he wasn't the greatest defender. That wasn't his role, right? His role was to be an offensive guy, right? And then you had Colin Murray-Boyles, who was only 6'7", and Stephen Clark, his minutes kind of went up and down. BBV, who's back this year, and by the way, looks like a freaking truck. You wrote about him earlier this week, right? He's huge.
Enormous. If you don't know, he went from – I'll have a more in-depth story out on him with the law degree and his journey to bulk up to where he is now pretty soon here, hopefully next week. But he went from 228 at the beginning of the summer to 260. That is going to make a major difference. And he would probably be – I think I'm with you with Pringle being that key guy for this team this year. Like, that's going to take a lot of pressure off of CMB to where CMB was playing the 5 last year as a 6'7" guy. And he had a matchup. You see it against Auburn and Oregon where they have these dominant bigs. It's not that CMB can't hold his own. It's just that's a lot to put on a guy that is not as big as these dudes. You bring in Pringle and Butler, and you got BBV coming back. Obviously, Oku Federico, who knows what's happening with him. But the point is what you have is what you got, and you have good bigs that can probably match up, and Pringle is definitely right in there. But no, you're right. BBV, people sleep on him. People think he's just not that good of a player after what they saw last year and year 1 of LP. I think this dude is on a mission. This is year 3 for him here. He's going to try to go out with a bang, and I definitely could see it happening off the bench.
Yeah, he'll be a guy, if nothing else, he's going to play hard, and he can provide some rebounding. And though South Carolina was a good rebounding team as a whole last year, it was, for the most part, it was a combined effort. You had 6 different guys on the team that had 5 rebounds in the game and a few more that had 3. You didn't have very many dominant rebounding performances. BJ Mack had a couple of double-digit rebounding games. Colin Murray Boyles had a couple, but for the most part, it was a pretty combined effort. So if there's a game where maybe South Carolina's getting beat on the boards like they did against Auburn last year, or even like the game against Georgia, because Georgia had a lot of size, maybe that's a game where you steal 5 extra minutes with BBV. He eats a foul that doesn't have to go to Colin Murray Boyles or Nick Pringle, and he does some work on the glass. He can help you in that regard. But I think Nick Pringle is the guy in the starting lineup that's going to have a huge impact, just what he can provide defensively. And also, and Cam Scott told me this when we were talking on media days, he's a legitimate lob threat. People who didn't watch Alabama basketball a lot last year don't realize that Nick Pringle might have been one of the 10 to 15 most athletic players in college basketball last year from a complete body work standpoint. The dude is, I think Wes likes to say he's twitched up. The dude can jump out of the gym, but he can do it quickly. And basketball guys know what I mean when I say he's got second jump too, meaning as soon as he lands after jumping, he can get back up again like he's on springs or a trampoline. Like the dude can just jump. And South Carolina hasn't had a guy like that in a while that actually plays down low. They've had some wings who could really jump, but a down low player who's explosive like that, he can even switch onto smaller guards in certain matchups. I think that's going to be a big deal. So that's kind of my multifaceted answer to that, is that Arden Conyers is going to play a bigger role than people think he will, and that Nick Pringle is going to be a big reason why South Carolina has success this year if things go well for him.
Definitely. I'm with you on all that, man. I am really excited about this team. I think a lot of people are. The hype just feels – it doesn't feel like it's too much, but it just feels like there's something like a lot of people are expecting this team to get back this year. You just gave LP a brand new contract, an extension that runs through the end of this decade. There's a lot of pressure on this team, but at the same time, there's not, because you look at where people see them. 11th picked in the SEC media poll, not in bracketology right now. This is playing right into the palm of their hand, to where it's like you got them right where you want them. People are doubting you again. Not so much as last year where no one had expectations for you, but now that you've gone out there and done it once, people are expecting you to not be able to do it again. And so I think that plays really well for South Carolina to go out here and do some stuff. And we're going to transition into the last sport of the day, baseball. Now, we're recording this on Thursday. This will be posted on Sunday for Sunday Reset, hence the title name. South Carolina baseball plays Air Force on Saturday in a fall exhibition scrimmage. Kevin, you'll be there, and by the time this is posted, the game will have already happened. You'll have had your thoughts on GamecockCentral.com, so be sure to stay locked into GC for all of that. So we can't necessarily preview the scrimmage. We can't necessarily look back at the scrimmage. What we can do, though, is talk about the team in general and kind of just our overall thoughts. Because, Kevin, you've been out to some scrimmages now. So have I. We know this is a different look team. They got almost 30 different players that are new to the team, from the transfer portal, from recruiting, out of the high school ranks. This is a different looking team for those who just haven't been able to see them yet this year. And Saturday is probably going to be a lot of people's first time seeing this team in action, no less against a new opponent other than themselves in inter-squad scrimmages. It's going to be a 14-inning game. We'll see how it goes, how long it goes, Kevin. We'll try to get you on again next week to kind of recap what you saw out there. But overall, what kind of vibe do you get with this team from what you see? Do you feel like it's much looser? Do you feel like it's more strict? I mean, is it just different overall from what the Mark Kingston era was at South Carolina?
I think different is a good word, right? Loose can get dangerous in baseball, right? You want guys to be comfortable, but baseball is a sport that you have to be really disciplined in order for things to work out well. So I don't want to necessarily say they're loose, but they do seem comfortable, at least in what I've gotten to see so far. I think that the offense has had a few guys that are, for lack of a better way to put it, surprising in a good way. I mean, Talmadge LeCroy had turned into, prime Albert Pujols somehow. I mean, he had, 3 home runs in his first 8 at-bats or something like that. And 2 of them were like no doubters.
Yeah.
And there have been a few other guys. I think not to give away too much, because hopefully they'll be able to catch some teams off guard with this. But I think they're going to run a little bit more this year. I don't think that's because they all of a sudden got way faster, but they did add a couple of pieces. Dalton Mayshore in the outfield is a guy who can do a little bit of everything. When he gets on the bases, he's dangerous. He's not afraid to steal second and then turn right around and steal third if he feels like he's got a good jump on the pitcher. And pitching is where we're gonna see what this team is made of. There is more pitching talent on this year's team than last year's team, I believe. However, a lot of that talent is inexperienced, at least at South Carolina. There's a few JUCO arms who, Jack, I mean, you've seen, there's a few JUCO arms that are just unbelievable that have gotten to South Carolina. Brandon Stone he's
been good.
He's really, really talented. And I think he's better than he's pitched so far. And that's what's scary. He's been pretty good. I think he's better than that. Totally. And he could be a starter, like a weekend starter before all is said and done. So if South Carolina's pitching staff can, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, if they can take advantage of the talent they have and perform up to that level, I think this year's team will be better than last year. Because I think the offense is going to be solid and potentially better than solid just off what we've seen so far. Obviously, you can't talk about this team without talking about Ethan Petrie. He's back. He's still Ethan Petrie. He's going to hit in the middle of your order, and he's going to hit a lot of home runs, and he's going to drive in a lot of runs. So if the guys around him do what we think they're capable of doing and the pitching steps up, I think you're looking at a pretty solid year from South Carolina.
No, totally. And with Petrie, look, I've had people we obviously do observations after every scrimmage and stuff. And it's been me there. You've been there. Peyton Butt's been there. Griffin go. We've had the whole crew pretty much there to see this team. And a lot of people will ask me, what's up with Ethan Petrie? Because, I had one person comment on the Insiders Forum recently. Can't remember who it was, but they were like, I feel like I'm reading these stories. I'm seeing Ethan Petrie strike out all the time. That has not really been the case. I think a lot of people, there hasn't been a ton that Petrie's done offensively yet this year in fall scrimmages. And again, it's fall, but he's hit the ball pretty well. Let's not get that misconstrued. He has hit a few balls that should leave the yard on a normal spring day next season. But because the wind was blowing in, the ball stayed in the yard. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And look, I think with this offense, they're going to be good. I feel like we have a pretty good idea of what the starting nine potentially could look like as of right now. At the same time, I think we don't know what the true identity is. Are they going to be that aggressive base stealing team? Or is it just the fact that it's fall scrimmages? And like Paul Maneri said at the beginning of the fall in his opening press conference, the players are going to have the green light to run whenever they want to. So is it more of that? Or is it actually hey, this team's going to be running a lot? And we'll see some of that probably in the scrimmage on Saturday against Air Force. And then as the season approaches, we'll figure out what this team looks like. But I do think they're going to definitely have a few boppers in the lineup. They're going to hit their fair share of homers. But I also expect them to do a lot of the little things right. They're going to probably take extra bases. They're probably going to bunt. And they're going to drive runners in. I like what I'm seeing offensively right now. Now, the pitching staff, you're right. They definitely have a lot of good talent. But the problem is, and maybe it's, who knows how it will end up being, if it is an issue or not. They don't have the SEC, South Carolina type of experience. Some do, like your Matthew Beckers and your Eli Jersenbecks, Dylan Eskews. Same time, there's a lot of guys, a lot of new faces that they're going through their first time playing against SEC competition when you're facing South Carolina every day. So this might be a little too far in advance of a question, but I'll ask it anyway. There's no wrong answers here. If you had to kind of project right now on October 24th, 2024, with a few months to go until opening day, what does your opening weekend rotation look like?
Oh, wow. Ooh. Eli Jersenbeck looks healthy to me.
He looks good.
He
looks good. We'll see him. Well, I think we're going to see him again on Saturday. That has not been 100% confirmed, but that is supposed to be the case. Obviously, by the time it'll happen, but you're right. Jerzenbeck's look good so far.
And if he's ready to go, I think he has Friday night potential. I'm not saying he's going to start Friday night, especially at the beginning of the year, but I think I'm slotting him into one of those 3 spots with the caveat that he's 100% ready to go. And, a lot of guys who are coming back from long-term injuries like Tommy John, after they're healthy for a couple months, they get into arm fatigue stuff. So if he can avoid that too, and he's 100% ready to go, I think he's in there probably Saturday or Sunday. Dylan Eskew, especially at the beginning of the year, I think is going to get the nod. And if he pitches well, like he did, down the stretch a good bit last year, I think he'll stick around in the rotation. He doesn't have necessarily the electric type stuff that somebody like Jerzenbeck has, but he was very solid at times last year. If his sinker is working, he gets a lot of ground balls. So I think that's a guy that, especially for the beginning of the year, I'd project there. The 3rd spot.
It's always the toughest one.
Yeah, Matthew Becker has been in and out of the rotation. He's a veteran. I don't know that I would see him being there, but I can't rule it out, especially early in the year. Brandon Stone, like I said, very good JUCO arm. I would probably say for the beginning of the year, we're going to see Dylan Eskew, Eli Jerzenbeck, and Brandon Stone. That's my projection.
I'm kind of with you on that. And I think for me, and to be fair, I think I've probably been there a lot more at these scrimmages, to be honest. So, look, I like the answer because I think you're honestly probably – look, it could go any way, to be honest, because here's the thing. They have a lot of capable starting pitchers. There are going to be some guys that you would think would start for this team. They might end up being long relief bullpen type pieces. And maybe that is a benefit, but we'll have to see how Pulmonary does cut the roster down because, look, it's going to be at 45 for this weekend. But for opening day, it's supposed to be at 40, and then next year it's at 34 with all scholarship players. For me, based on just what I've seen right now, and again, I don't know if this will be the rotation come opening weekend, but from what I've seen, I think Eli Jerzenbeck is going to be in there. He has been awesome so far this year. Very solid for this team. I think he's got Friday night stuff. That's always been the case since he arrived here. That was always been the talk that he's got. Even Mark Kingston said that a ton. I think with him, he's probably going to start out the year maybe on a Sunday. I think look at like a Jack Mahoney from a few years ago when he was coming back from Tommy John, and he was this really good midweek pitcher. It's kind of a similar case when you think about it because Jerzenbeck 2 years ago was starting a lot of these midweek games for South Carolina. Had a good season, but he got roughed up a little bit here and there. But overall, he pitched very well as the midweek guy for Carolina. Same deal with Jack Mahoney when he was a freshman, and then he had Tommy John. And then when he came back for his junior year, or redshirt sophomore year, I should say, he was that Sunday starter at the beginning of the year and kind of moved up as the year went along. So I think Jerzenbeck probably starts out as your 3 on Sundays. As for the 1 and 2, I'm going to go with right now. I've been really, really impressed with Matthew Becker. I think he's got the best stuff on the team right now. We've known for a long time how good his off speed is. That curveball, man, it's really, really good, especially when he's rocking on all cylinders. He's thrown a lot of strikes this year. The one issue with him and with a lot of these guys has been walks. But so far this year, like from the latest stats I've been keeping up with, he's got like 10 strikeouts, 1 walk. I'm assuming he'll pitch this weekend against Air Force, but he's been really, really good this year. And he's striking out. He's not striking out like weak batters. He's going up against Ethan Petrie and blowing fastballs by him. So I think we'll see Matthew probably be that probably 1 or 2. I'm going to go with the Friday night guy right now, being him, just because he's got a lot to prove this year. Obviously, a lot of these guys are coming back because their draft stock just wasn't where they thought it was going to be. And I think with Terry Rooney at the helm, with John Hendry helping out with the pitching, I think you're going to see a lot of these guys take big steps forward. And you see the track record with Rooney, with Justin Verlander, a lot of these other guys being selected in the MLB draft from pitching standpoint. I think you see something like that with Becker as someone who has a lot to prove this year in his senior year, and he's going to go out with a bang, in my opinion. Now, as for the Saturday guy, you can go a lot of different directions. And I'm hesitant to say it because, look, he showed flashes last year, but he also happened to be one of the most struggling pitchers for a time last year, and that's Roman Kimball. Roman has got good stuff, as we know. He can sit mid-90s with his fastball. He's got some good off-speed pitches. The walks, like Becker, were his issue last year. But he did pitch very well in that SEC tournament game against LSU before the defense really did him no favors. But so far this year, he hasn't given up any runs or anything. He's been solid for this team. So I think right now, Becker, Kimball, Jerzembeck, and as your midweek starter, not to get too far ahead of myself, a name that I have been very impressed with, and I think this would make sense because he's a younger guy, new guy on the team. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Ryder Garino. If you don't know the name, keep an eye on him. Very, very good right-handed pitcher. A lot of strikeouts, not a ton of walks. He's been solid this year from what I've seen, and I think that's a guy that you need a reliable midweek pitcher, not as much pressure as these weekend series. I think that is your early candidate right there. But we're still so far out from the season, and there's going to be a lot to talk about after this Air Force game. Kevin, I'll ask you just a few more things here, and we can kind of look back at this on Sunday when the video comes out. If you had to make some predictions right now for what you'd like to see in this scrimmage, is there anything you would put your finger on as like, I like to see this? Is it just the aggressive base stealing? Is it the pitching doing well, the offense? What do you kind of hope to see on Saturday when you're there?
I think the two big things, especially in a scrimmage setting, because they're not going to be treating this exactly like a game, but it's going to be a little bit more game-like than the inter-squad scrimmages have been. So what I want to see is I want to see pitchers hitting their spots, not walking batters, doing their part to limit base runners with their control. I don't think you can, realistically think you can go 14 innings without walking any batters. That's not what I mean. But is South Carolina walking a batter every inning? Are they letting multiple guys on with free passes from walks or hit by pitches? So if you can see the pitchers, because they'll probably throw a lot of guys, right? If you can see the pitchers avoid those free passes, I think that's a good sign. And then offensively, just taking advantage of hittable pitches and not chasing non-hittable pitches, which sounds extremely cliche. You're talking about baseball, only swing at good pitches. But the reality is, if you're swinging at breaking pitches in the dirt, you're not going to have a lot of success as an offense. If you're swinging at the fastballs over the middle of the plate, you will. It's the most obvious thing for a reason. It's because it's real, it's true, it's indicative of success. There's a reason why so many of the best players in Major League Baseball in terms of like power numbers and stuff are also the guys that usually have a pretty good total number of walks. It's because when the pitchers try to pitch around them a little bit, they have a good enough eye to not chase bad pitches. And when they get pitches in the zone, they take advantage. And so I want to see from South Carolina, I want to see Ethan Petry and the other guys that the offense is counting on. I want to see them have some solid plate discipline. And just a note on Petry, by the way, the dude was awful heading into his freshman year. Okay, to the point he wasn't starting. He wasn't a candidate to start. He was originally thought to be second, maybe third string third baseman. And then, right, he gets in for a couple pinch hit appearances, smacks the ball up the middle. I think both times were hits up the middle. And Mark Kingston put him in the lineup, and they're like, I guess we'll throw him in right field. And we know the rest of the story. Some guys just perform differently under the lights than they do in practice settings. So don't be too alarmed by Ethan Petry. And I won't even say struggling, but not hitting every pitch over the fence. So don't be alarmed by that. We'll see on Saturday some of these guys step up, and it wouldn't shock me one bit if he is one of them, because the competitive juices seem to flow a little bit differently for him when he's facing off against another team.
I agree. And look, with Petrie, you brought up the point that he struggled his first fall as a freshman. That is well noted by this point. And look at what happened. He's been outstanding. And the thing is, last time I updated stats, the guy was hitting over 300 still. So it's not like he was
Right.
not like he was hitting a buck 50 like some guys and struggling to even hit the ball. He's getting walked a lot. He's taking pitches. Does he strike out a little bit? Yeah, but again, he's facing good arms that are throwing him nothing but off speed and junk. So with him, I think he's gonna be fine. The one interesting thing I'm wondering this weekend is, we saw him in right field his first few years here at South Carolina as the primary starter. Then some injuries happened last year, and he slots in at first base. He plays there down the stretch through the NCAA tournament, and then he goes back to right field for the fall. Now, earlier this week, I was talking with Peyton Butt, who's been at these scrimmages for us this week, so shout out to her. But she was telling me that he's been at third base, which was where he was at, ironically, when he was a freshman at South Carolina. And he's been playing there a good bit. So we'll know this after the scrimmage, but I wonder if he'll be there at third base. I mean, do you put him in the outfield? Do you put him I don't think he's going to be at first, but do you put him at third or in the outfield, in your opinion?
I mean, I think your ideal scenario probably would have him at third base, not because like he's an elite third baseman, but because that opens up a spot in the outfield for what I think is a crowded outfield. I think there's a lot of talent. I don't know that that's what's going to happen. KJ Scobie is a freshman, has been really good at third base in terms of like what you'd hope to see from a freshman, in his first fall. Obviously, like he's not been lighting the world on fire, but he's shown a lot of signs. There have been a few balls that have gotten past him.
Yeah, that's third with him. A few errors here and there, but at the same time, I feel like he makes up for it with the fact of he does make some decent plays at third. He's also playing the toughest position on the field, in my opinion, at the hot corner. But the way he puts the ball in play, his bat to ball skills, very, very impressive for a freshman.
I agree. And one of the other guys that's been working at third is Jordan Carrion, and he's got some positional versatility. Like he could end up at multiple different positions. So there's another, there's a chance that opens up some third base time there that Petrie could slide in as well. And first base is still an option. I know Jace Woida is supposed to be the real deal, coming over from was it Kansas City, Kansas Junior College?
Yeah, one of those JUCO schools.
Yeah, and if he struggles and you've got 4 or 5 outfielders ready to play, maybe you do see Petrie slide to first base. I'm not expecting Woida to struggle because, like Scobie, he's a good let me get the barrel on this ball type of hitter.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to be getting Petrie those reps at third in case you need him there. He's a solid outfielder, better than a lot of people give him credit for. Like he's not a black hole out there like you might see with, I'm a Braves fan, and watching somebody like Jorge Soler play the outfield it's painful. It's painful. So he's not that. He's not Jorge Soler in the outfield. So if he ends up out there, it's not like it's some massive problem. But there are potentially some better defensive options. So if things work out and he ends up at third base and he can hold his own, I don't think that's the worst thing at all.
No, definitely not. And we're going to see what happens. Apparently, Wood has been playing a little bit of the outfield as well. And again, you're right. This outfield is crowded. Kennedy Jones is probably starting in left field. Despite his defense not being great, maybe he just ends up being the DH.
It could DH, yeah.
That's the thing. We don't know who the DH is going to be with this team consistently. It might rotate. Who knows? But center field, I feel like it's probably Nathan Hall. And then right field, I feel like Blake Jackson's probably going to be an opening day starter for this team. He's been a little banged up. Hasn't been doing a ton yet this fall. But again, we know what he can do. Bat to ball skills. You definitely don't want a ton of – you want your home run hitters in this lineup like Petrie and Woida, guys like that. Same time, you want your contact hitters, and you got some on this team. And I think there's a lot of versatility all around with what a potential starting nine might look like.
Yeah, and that battle in center with Hall and Mayshore, I mean, they're not the only ones, but those two guys, that's going to be one to watch for sure.
No, most definitely. Kevin, We have gone on way too long today, off talking about all three sports. But you know what? That's what happens during the bye week. We talk about football, basketball, baseball. Everything is just kind of coming together as one right now, even on a bye week. But I appreciate you hopping on, man. Before I let you get out of here, I do this with all of my guests that hop on. Tell us what you got going on. You're obviously pretty new to GC. So tell us about kind of what people can expect from you and where can they find your work and how can they follow you on Twitter and whatnot?
Yeah, I kind of am helping out all over the place on the site right now. You know, I've written about football, men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball. I've kind of, like I said, I've kind of been all over the place. But during the football season, obviously, there's been, you know, kind of a premium on football content. So one of the things I've enjoyed getting to do is for our subscribers is break down a handful of plays each week where I'm taking 3 plays that were positive results for South Carolina and kind of breaking them down from a scheme standpoint, an execution standpoint, putting some still shots up, letting you see how plays are developing. That's been kind of a cool thing to do, but, you know, just helping out wherever I can. Jack, obviously, you're covering a lot of things as well, but just trying to play my part. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I guess you can find me at Kevin B. Miller 52. That 52 is in there because that was my football number in high school, and that's when I made a Twitter, and I just never changed it. So, so you can find me there at Kevin B. Miller 52. But yeah, I will have a lot of things up on Gamecock Central, both free things for those who don't subscribe, and some premium articles for our subscribers too.
Yeah, and you should definitely subscribe to Gamecock Central. We got so much good content coming out. This guy is a workhorse, man. I thought I wrote a lot. This dude, I don't know how he does it. Shu puts you to work, and you just do it, man. It's crazy. So we're happy to have you on, man. Thank you for joining me today, and we will definitely do this again soon with you hopping on.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate it, Kevin. That was Kevin Miller from Gamecock Central, great coworker of mine. And yeah, that is about going to do it for this episode of GC Live Sunday Reset. Again, this is going to be going out on Sunday at some point, and it will not be a live stream, unfortunately. So I apologize for that, but we'll be going back to live streams starting next Sunday after the Texas A&M game when South Carolina, hopefully we're talking about a win. That game is going to be under the lights at Williams-Brice Stadium. Should be a really, really great game, and we'll have to see what happens. So glad we got to talk about all 3 sports today. We're going to be having a lot of coverage coming out the rest of the way here. We got baseball scrimmage observations coming out on Saturday. So obviously when you're watching this, go back and look at that, please. Kevin's going to be there checking it all out, providing his updates and coverage and all that. And then hoops start next week with exhibition games. South Carolina men's basketball takes on the College of Wooster next Wednesday. I will be there at CLA providing all coverage and updates. We're going to be doing GC Live at the buzzer next week, and we'll be breaking down that game for sure or previewing it. We'll see, but we'll definitely dive into our season previews of South Carolina men's basketball as well as the women because they deserve their time in the spotlight for sure as well, considering just how good of a program they are. And then obviously football continues to roll on with 5 games left to go in the season. So got a lot going on Gamecock Central. If you're not subscribed already, I highly recommend doing so. If you're not, I don't know what you're doing if you're not. It's not a good idea. I definitely would encourage you because you're missing out if not, especially with all the good things going on. And then outside of that, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page where you can find all videos like this. If you enjoyed today's live stream, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Would really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have a lot going on. So be sure to stay locked into GamecockCentral.com for all coverage, updates, stories, a lot of good stuff going on right now. Like I said, as basketball season heats up and football is in the midst of a good thing going on. So that's going to do it for today. And I will see you guys on next week's episode next Sunday for Sunday Reset. Take care, guys.